Mistakes Over Failure, where CEOs and board members from around the world share the good, the bad, and the ugly of their diversity and inclusion journeys. We are CEOs.
We understand the pressures of leadership and the rules that are often unwritten.
I'm Dr. Christine Crawford.
And I'm Leslie Wingo. Together, we're here to spark honest and frank conversations that will encourage us to think differently, learn from failures, avoid inaction, and encourage each of us to make mistakes.
The world needs better leaders, and we can become better together. Welcome, everyone, to Mistakes Over Failure, and we are excited to welcome Rochelle Pattison today. So, Rochelle, if you could tell Leslie and I about yourself and just introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, I'm Rochelle Pattison. I'm Director of Chimaera Capital here in Melbourne, a diversified financial services company. I'm also Chair of Transgender Victoria, Victoria's largest transgender advocacy and service providers. I'm also a hockey player. I continue to play field hockey in the Victorian Hockey Women's Association sport. And I live here in Melbourne with my wife and two delightful sons, 16 and 14, who challenge me every day. I was born in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. It's a little area of Australia in outback rural area. And so grew up on a farm until the whole family decamped to Ethiopia for about 18 months when I was a child. And then went to university, law, commerce, met the person who would become my wife whilst in my first year at university, and then started school. And it started university, and I'd always been interested in business. And I'd always been focused on wanting to do something along the lines of banking or commercial transactions. So given my background, that pushed me into a professional sort of career path. I went become a lawyer. After a bit over a year, that didn't run well, so I went off to become a chartered accountant. I became a chartered accountant with Arthur Andersen, which was a great experience to just get diversity of businesses, also the professionalism that came with that. I left Arthur Andersen to found my own business with another guy from Arthur Andersen, and that's how Chimaera Capital started. We were financing a book it grew to be about $10 billion of Japanese, Australian equities, and that's a pretty good skill set to have. A couple of corporate moves, and suddenly we were an independent business. And that was when Chimaera really started becoming what it is today, and that's a diversified financial business. And we do a whole horde of different things, but our core is our securities business, but corporate advisory. And when we talk about mistakes, learning from mistakes and things that go wrong, is we had a big wake-up call around early on in 2000s, actually, when one of the people we were financing went into Chapter 11. And so we were staring down the hole at a big loss. We've moved in and took over the business, essentially, and restructured it under Chapter 11. And that was a really good learning experience for us to do it while situated in Australia, dealing with the bankruptcy court over here. And that's how we developed our expertise in restructures and getting businesses going. And that was a digital photography business being run out of Switzerland and Italy. So very multinational, moving around. Unfortunately, it got swept up in the Apple and phones being on cameras. We had the technology to convert analog images to digital images. And then the GFC was when we got a real experience in how to handle mistakes and how to handle failure, because we had an entire business collapse, and we ended up in a court process for probably 4 years, arguing with financiers and They were suing us for 350 mil. We sued them for 250 million. It was guns drawn at 40 paces. And ultimately, as with all these things, it ended up being a negotiated settlement. But we learned a great deal of lessons about how to manage risk, how to manage when things go wrong, and how to fight.
We have a series of rapid fire questions. So are you ready?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. What emoji do you use most often?
It's become the praying hands, the thank you, gratitude.
What was your first job?
Because I grew up on a farm, I was working on the farm. And it became very clear very rapidly that I was not suited for that career.
Business acronyms, love them or hate them?
Love them.
What is your guilty pleasure?
Generally reading, taking the time to read.
What is the hobby or job you have always wanted, but you haven't done so yet?
Ooh, well, being involved in politics.
Rochelle, is there anything that you want to share about us personally or tell us about your family, about...
So 2008, which was when the GFC hit, that was when our first child was born. He was born on the Sunday. On the Monday, my entire business pretty much collapsed and started 6 to 7 months of just financial wrangling with banks. What also happened at that time was it really unlocked feelings that I'd been denying to myself for most of my life, and that was my gender identity. And that became a huge, perfect storm of where I was dealing with the shame and the significant challenges with a business collapse, becoming a new parent. And at this time, my wife was fairly unwell, and I didn't really know who I was and what I was and how I should address the world. And that was a really tough time in my life, because you love your family, you love your children, but there were people attacking you. And like on the day of my son's christening, I was front page of the business news with this big, if you've got your funds with Chimaera Capital, get it out now. And so we suffered, and it was very full on. At the same time, I was relieving the pressure that I had in my life, going to visit cross-dressing salons and finding some relief that way. It was pretty tough. And then you fast forward to 2012, 2013, the legal wrangling is coming to an end and successful outcome. And then both my parents die. And so it was a constant assault on where I was. We'd had our second son by that stage. That was going well. I was drinking heavily. And by this stage, I'm trying to think of a strategy whereby I can balance my gender identity and do business. And I could not come up with an answer. And I was heavily suicidal at that stage. And then finally, one day I thought, I can't do this by myself. And I sought help with a therapist. 2015, I went out in public for the first time as a woman. The euphoria associated that is really hard to describe, and it's very hard for people who haven't had a gender identity issue to understand. But I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. And you just don't ever want to let that feeling go. Now, roll back a bit. I mean, I'd always known I'd had these issues, although I didn't know what those issues were. But, back when I was 25, 26, and I'd gone to a cross-dressing salon and been fully transformed. And that was the first time I'd looked in the mirror and seen someone I liked. And it was such an amazing experience to go, oh my God, I could be beautiful, but I must not be like this. And that is not who, we all have a movie reel in our head about who we're supposed to be. And that wasn't what I was supposed to be. And of course, I was a very businessy person. And being transgender and being a business person was not compatible. So I had to suppress, mainly through drinking and also throwing myself into business. So that really helped develop the business for a long time. But come 2014, 2015, that was really starting to fall apart. And it was then that I finally was honest with Catherine, told her I had the gender identity issues and that we needed to be honest with each other. And I don't think any wife wants to receive that sort of news. But we were able to work through that. And she was open to have the conversation. I guess that's so important in anything in life, is to discuss the implications about what you're talking about. We had the conversation and thought we didn't really know where it would lead us to. She agreed that I could have an apartment where I could keep with my women's clothing and that I could just start experiencing it. Because I'd only been out in public twice when I told Catherine. And I needed a lot of work to work out how to present and what worked and what did not. And many would say I'm still working on that. But it's within 2 months, Catherine could see the difference it made to my general demeanour around the house, how I wasn't as angry, how I wasn't a nasty person. I'm a better person. And then fast forward 7, 8 months, and I had the conversation and said, I think I'm going to transition. And she said, I'm not surprised. And then the entire exercise became about how do we tell the children? How do we tell people? And then, we developed it. It became what did it really become? It became an exercise in PR and telling people what we were going to be doing. So we had a 200-day countdown towards a day in December, which was 1 week after they'd finished school for the year, because we wanted to have the maximum amount of time with the children to discuss what we were going to do and how things were going to change, and for them to get used to the idea. The reality is it took them possibly 30 minutes to get used to the idea. And then I came out and we had a whole communication strategy. Parents at school, because we were concerned about being ostracised, and all the clients' business contacts. There was about 400 or 500 emails went out on the day that I came out. And acceptance was pretty quick. There'd be about 4 or 5 people who have exited my life. But by and large, more people have come into it since. So I don't know if that's a mistake over failure, but that's slowly grinding forward and reaching a decision and then being prepared to live with what that decision was.
So in YPO, we talk a lot about forum and the 3 aspects, if you will, the buckets of business, family, personal. And as you tell this story, I can hear the different impacts, the intersections of your life, if you will. What was the aha one and saying, okay, I've talked to my wife about this, but now I need to talk to my forum. And then 2, what was the other aha, or where did you get to the place of, I'm going to be okay in all of this?
And let's remind what forum is for our non-YPO listeners. So forum is basically a support group of other business leaders that exist within the organization of Young Professionals, organization YPO.
Forum is a place where you're not supposed to have barriers. And I had had barriers forever, and I was presenting a personality that I thought people needed to see. So my participation in forum was always very guarded. So I came out to Catherine October 2015. May 2016, we had a retreat where we were required to present our 5-year plan. And I was sitting there preparing the business outline, a family outline to present to her. And I ultimately said, this is ridiculous. This is not the 5 years I want to live. And I won't live this 5 years. So I said to Catherine, I'm going to come out to the forum. And she said, good luck with that. And we had an experienced YPO person there. They presented on their 5-year plan, and it was excellent. Had a very good result. And then one of my forum mates started to wind up on his, and I've said, no, I've got to go now. And if I don't go now, I never will. He still holds that against me because he never got to present his forum, his 5-year plan. And I said, my 5-year plan is that in 5 years I will be a woman. And that was a very quiet room. And people, to say they were shocked would be a great understatement, because I was not at all a feminine person. And I actually had to ask them if they'd heard what I said, because it was so quiet. And they were very accepting, as they gave me some really good encouragement. And that retreat turned out to be one of the most successful retreats, because all barriers had been removed among us ourselves.
So how did learning to break down barriers and become more authentic in your personal life and in your relationships with your colleagues, how did that translate to your business, right? So you have this team that you've been leading and this company you founded, and how did that impact your business?
From a personal perspective, it made my life immeasurably better. Being able to be honest and authentic, not having to invent stories about where you'd been or how you felt, was immensely freeing. And within the workplace, that meant I was a happier person, a happier leader. And my business has always been a partnership between myself and another guy from Arthur Anderson. What we found, though, is that it's not so great in a business circumstance. I can form good relationships and pretty authentic relationships, but there is always a reticence to commence because people are really afraid of saying the wrong thing and, causing immeasurable offence. So they withdraw. And of course, then there are people who are just offensive to start with. And like, we've had meetings where subsequently there's been a complaint made about why they were put into, I think the words one day was, why was I put into a scene from Rocky Horror Show? I wish I had Frankenfurter's body. But it's challenging for people. It's challenging for people. So increasingly, I'm no longer so much in the front line of many of the things we do. I'm more of a backroom person, and that's been hard to deal with.
I have a question. So one of the things that we talk about here in my office is equity and inclusion, belonging. And for us, it's important for people to feel like they belong and that they're going to be okay, especially when we're at work or if we're in Zoom rooms or however that shows up. What would it take, in your view, to make you feel like you belonged in spaces and places, more specifically at work and leading teams?
I think to feel like you're belonging is just being treated with respect, and to not have people putting up barriers to you being involved in things. Competence is not an issue, but there is an issue of bringing people in and not putting up barriers to them being involved. So too often meetings are held where it's, you shouldn't come along because it'll create a lack of comfort. And we're a small organisation and we're out there trying to raise money at times. So it's a risk question. But the barriers that have been put in place from time to time should not have been put in place. I think it's really important just to be brave, because too often people imagine the reaction is going to be worse than what it is. And I have another friend whose comment is, sometimes it's better just not to do business with some people. If it's going to be such a barrier, then why are we doing business with those people? And that's the reality of it.
So you talked about people being both afraid to be offensive and then those who are just offensive, right?
Yes, that's right.
So what would be your advice to both, right?
Okay, the people who are afraid of offending, one of the things that I'm now heavily involved in is Transgender Victoria. So it's an advocacy group and a group that provides services to transgender people in Victoria. And it's not so much a concern about making mistakes, it's how you handle the mistakes when they happen. And it's not a catastrophe to make a mistake. I try and control my voice and have certain, pitch and things. But as soon as I start thinking about something hard, my voice goes right down there. And it's the same. We should be free to talk about what's important at work and not have to focus on how we relate to each other so much. If you have good intentions, if you make a mistake, apologize, move on. It doesn't matter. It's not a catastrophe. And when you blow it up for I'm sorry I've called you he, I'm sorry I've called you by your prior name. It's about you. It's not about me. It's making me uncomfortable. Let's just progress forward. Then don't lose your life fretting about mistakes. Don't lose opportunities worrying about mistakes. If you make a mistake, identify it, apologize if it's required, just move on.
So what would be your advice for those who are offensive, right? Because I think those are the folks who, if with this podcast, would be on what we consider failure, right? Which is they keep doing the same thing, not in pursuit of better, but just determined to say what they want to say.
Yeah, look, they need to learn. They need to be open to learning. They also need to ask themselves of why it is so important to them. For non-binary people, who want to be addressed by as they, them, but that's not proper English. Has anyone picked up a newspaper recently, and probably done it online? Journalists can't spell, let alone use words with the correct tense, and we're stressing about they, them pronouns. And you're arguing that someone's gender identity is because the English use of those words is incorrect. It's because you don't like it. Be honest with yourself. Now, I can't criticise because it took 48 years for me to be honest with myself. But that's what you just need to be, is honest that you just don't like this and you're looking for arguments as to why it's not right. Just learn. It doesn't impact on your life. It really doesn't. I think there is a responsibility for people to educate themselves, yes. But I think when you're a totally marginalised group of people who you do need to be prepared, and opportunities do open up for themselves from time to time. And you have to try and control your temper and then exploit the opportunities when they arise. I was having lunch, which became dinner, which became after dinner drinks. And the group I was with grew until there was about 10, 12 men and me. And eventually, late, someone said, are we going to talk about the elephant in the room of why the hell are you wearing a dress? I was really shocked because I hadn't realized I was the elephant in the room. And that was a moment where I just to stand my ground and say, I'm a transgender woman. This is how I am. And I made this decision to live proudly and authentically. At that stage, it was 4 years ago. And standing the ground, saying there's nothing weird about this. This is not something I'm doing on the weekend. This is my life. Really opened the eyes for most of the other men who were there. And the one who couldn't accept that left and was encouraged to leave by the others.
Okay, so you've done business leadership. You're leading in the philanthropic and LGBTQ community with your work in Victoria. So what in the world did you decide that you needed yet another job and to go into politics? You just alluded to it being a hobby.
So I was involved in politics at university. I wanted to be involved in politics at high school. I have 7 or 8 friends who were involved in politics and have been government ministers here in Australia, and one was the president of the Senate. And I couldn't do that because I had a secret. And I did not want to be that person who was found dead in a hotel wearing suspenders. Or even worse, being outed. Once I came out, I decided I wanted to be proud and authentic, and that meant re-engaging in political scene. And I have slowly chugged along, and it reached the stage where it's time for me to put my hand up and try and run for pre-selection. And I've always had fairly strong views on things. Some of those views have moderated with age. And I think that I'm not an identity candidate, but if I can be elected, this power of being a visible trans woman and reassuring people that it's okay, I know will keep people alive.
You have an incredible way of storytelling and making people feel something when you tell your stories. We've all been through something, right? Everybody's going through something that they may have shame around. But the way you layer your stories makes, for me anyway, it's very engaging. How do you keep the conversation going to keep people abreast of all of the possibilities of creating new futures and letting other people create new futures, and everything's going to be okay?
I think visibility is important. And I think leading by example and leading with courage is important. Actually, and when we hark back to the name of the podcast, I think reminding people that it's okay to fail is really important, and that failure is not always catastrophic, and that you may need to fail in order to live the life you were supposed to live. And so coming out and saying to people, this is who I am, could have been a massive fail. But when people ask me what my greatest regret was, my greatest regret is that I didn't trust enough. I didn't trust my family to accept me. I didn't trust my friends to accept me. And I didn't trust myself to have the courage to live the life that I should have lived.
So I want to share one of my favorite new quotes, which is, the biggest barrier to acceptance is normally ourselves. And that is from Rochelle.
Oh.
And so, Rochelle, I want to thank you for helping give so many others the strength to break through barriers and to be themselves. And I want to tell you profoundly thank you from Leslie and I for trusting us and trusting the community of our listeners with your story. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Christine. Thanks a lot, Leslie. That's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
We are Mistakes Over Failures, a podcast by YPO, the global leadership community of extraordinary chief executives.